I told her to pronounce it like I was an Italian soccer player. That generally works for people from the West Coast who don't know how to say Italian last names. I've had mixed results. Good job though, Florida. I believe in you. Anyways, good morning, hello. If you've seen me speak, you did the right thing in response to that. Hi, Emily. Anyways, here to talk to you about static sites. But before I have to talk about that, I have to tell you I have a confession to make. I recently actually left front-end development, and I don't write JavaScript anymore, I write Java. And it's really funny when I say this to JavaScript engineers, because they're like, oh, I'm sorry, why would you do that? You know what's funny? Java engineers say the same thing about JavaScript. So maybe stop doing that, just a thought. But I don't regret it at all. It's a different problem space, and it's really cool to work on something that's completely different from what I've been doing since I was like 12. But why am I here talking to you about this? Like, why did my company decide to send me to this conference even? If I'm not writing JavaScript anymore, why am I here talking to you about it? I care a lot about it because I do it in my free time. It is my favorite thing to do. And we are making an environment that is really difficult for people to use. We're making things that are hard to install, hard to use, not documented. They're just, it's frustrating. And because I do a lot of this in my personal time, I oftentimes just want to like type a couple commands and get going and not waste my time scaffolding like really shitty things. And so I care for selfish reasons. I care because it makes my life easier when things are great. When front end is great, my life is great. You know, I feel like that's good. You know, you want your life to be great. But a couple months ago, I was working on a project that was 3 to 6 months old, which I realize is basically like something that I wrote when I was in the uterus. Like that makes something really old. Like 3 to 6 months old in the front end space is just like a dinosaur. But I was like, oh, I wrote this. I know how this works. I'm just gonna run npm install and then npm start, and it's gonna be totally fine. It was not totally fine, and I spent the next 2.5 hours, embarrassed to say, trying to get my own project to run on my machine, the machine I had written it on, the machine I have not upgraded, because like I'm never going to restart my computer and install updates. And so like we've made this space that's really difficult to get into and to use, and so we're starting to feel fatigue with JS tooling. And we're making it harder and harder to do the creative stuff. We're making it harder to build things because the onboarding, oh, that's a cord, I'm gonna die. Because the onboarding is so difficult. And so we've gotten to this point where we want to be building things, but instead we're building the things to build the things. Do you know, I bet you there's a build tool to make a build tool. There probably is. And somebody probably wrote it in this room, so thanks for making it better. So we've got to this point where we have build tools for build tools. And like, how did we even get here? And because I think about things a lot, I have a couple theories about this. And I don't know how many of you have been in this field for a long time, but you probably remember and you probably feel it sometimes on the day-to-day that front-end is kind of a joke to people who've been working in like heavy back-end code for years. Like, they don't think it's hard. It is hard. I just want to like dispel the notion that it's not hard right now. But like, it's for many years been kind of the abandoned, sad puppy in the corner that nobody wants, which you should take home that puppy, please. But it wasn't serious. It was a silly thing that we all did for fun. And that's not true anymore. It is not true at all. Suddenly now, if you don't have a slick user experience, if you don't have a good UI, you can't sell your product, you can't get funding, you can't pay your engineers, and your company goes under. And so instead of just building things that were beautiful that we did for fun, we stopped caring about shipping and we started caring about selling. And like, I am not a salesperson. I do not want to do that. But the pressure to ship and the pressure to deliver and to have what we can do be measured and sold and ROI and all these like things. I didn't go to business school. I don't know what any of those words mean. And while I really like it when my paycheck clears, I don't want to have to be worried that it's not going to clear. I don't want to have to worry that the code I write means my paycheck is not going to clear. All we want to do is build cool shit. Like, that's all that we want to do. It's just build things. And I'm going to say something. This is why I left front end. But like, you've been building front end for a while. There are not that many challenging user experiences to build. There are challenges, absolutely, and it is difficult to get it right, absolutely. But how long does it really take you to make a profile page, to make a form, to upgrade a tiny package to a minor version. Like the little bits that we do day to day, the small pieces are relatively straightforward. It's the big architecture decisions and the frameworks and the APIs and the interfaces, that's where it gets difficult. But I got bored. And I think that a lot of other people got bored. And so instead of challenging themselves by building things for customers, we've been challenging ourselves to build tools for ourselves. And that's directly related to what our users see. Even though our users don't care what we're using, we make choices that actually impact what the users can do. And so because we've been trained to ship something we can sell, we've started, and we've all started doing this, and I mean literally we, not royal we, all the we's in the room, we all do this. We all say we can ship something faster to customers if we upgrade to this new library or this new framework. And we've been trained by industry management to do this. They want us to be able to prove to them that the thing that we're going to work on for 6 months that's not going to ship any features to customers but is going to make us much happier, that's a good business decision. And I'm here to tell you that this is a fucking lie. You're not actually going to ship stuff faster to customers if you spend 6 months changing to React. I'm sorry, but you're not. So if you're laughing, you know that your company's probably doing this right now. This is a lie that we tell ourselves so that we can convince our companies to let us do something that we enjoy that makes us happy. And this is okay, just know this about yourself maybe. But we really need to be focusing on our users. We need to be writing things for users. We need to make it about users. This does not mean that users are an excuse to upgrade. It also does not mean that users are an excuse to refactor. Users don't give a shit if you refactor your code. You care. And users don't care if we're trying something new that's interesting and fun. Users don't care if we get to do what we want. They just don't care. And so we have this philosophical lament and this frustration and this technical ennui about what we do, what we're building and what we're shipping. And it's become our users' problem because we're not shipping features to users. We're just not. And I would like to remind you, I'm sure that you are all wonderful people, and I would love to meet many of you. We have users because they want to use our products and not actually because they like us. If they like you, sure, that's a bonus. Maybe they'll give you more money. Actually, probably not. They'll just ask you for it for free. So you probably don't want your users to like you as people because then they'll want to use your stuff for free. And so the users don't care. They just do not care about those tools. They do not care about those libraries. They care when you actually ship. But instead of shipping, we've been building this ecosystem, this huge ecosystem of tools. And I like to think of it as kind of like a rainforest, full of creatures, small and large, poisonous and deadly, supported, extinct, no documentation, rogue version numbers. So we've got this thriving ecosystem of JavaScript tools. And it's great because as an engineer, you go and you build your shit. It's cool. But the options are super, super, super overwhelming. Go to the next slide. Thank you. The options are super overwhelming. Think about when you've tried to get a CSS framework or skeleton in a project. There are thousands of them. Stop writing them, please. I am too distracted. I am too distracted by my options. And we all are. We're all guilty of being distracted by the things that are around us. But the problem is instead of being distracted and then focusing on something, we're basically running around a playground like children because we have all these shiny, cool new things we want to do. And that's fun, and that's great for a little while, but as a result, we now have these ridiculous front-end applications that are over-architected and just, why? Why do you need so much to do a freaking profile page with a picture and a form? We're over-architecting basic experiences to keep ourselves interested. And by we there, I might mean me, but, maybe you too. And so we have a lot of tools, and we are running out of carpenters. We like building our tools, we like using our tools, but we're not actually building things with them anymore. So I want to talk about rethinking what we're actually building and why we're actually building it. And so let's talk about static sites. And a lot of people have different definitions about what a static site is. And it's funny, when I was talking to a coworker about this, they were like, oh no, that definition is not right, Liz. No, that one is wrong. And I was like, that's cute. This is my talk. So he was not invited to this conference. So JavaScript people, I'm sorry, no JavaScript. But no database, no backend. Largely no JavaScript. And that's kind of a hard sell on browser day. It's like no JavaScript. But like follow me along here for just a minute. I swear I'll get there. But like, what do you actually need JavaScript for? Like if you're not tracking your user state, if you're not logging people in and out, if you're not getting data from a third party or your own database, like what do you actually need it for? If you're going to tell me you need it for scrolling, that is wrong. Do not do that. That is a bad user experience. But like, do you really need a complicated JavaScript framework to make reusable components? No, you don't. What core piece of your site do you need JavaScript for? Like, really think about that. Nothing. I mean, if you're logging in and you're a bank, yeah, you probably need to make sure that that's the right password. But like, you don't need it for as many things as you think you need it for. And so all those fancy component-oriented architecture frameworks that encourage us to do all these things and make models and blah, 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 blah. No, not really. And there's a lot to be said about what we can do with CSS that we can also do with JavaScript that a lot of us, myself included until recently, have just been resistant to learn because I already know how to do it in JavaScript. Why would I learn how to do it in CSS? You should do it in CSS because you're already loading a style sheet. So just put more stuff in your style sheet. Just a thought. Any good UI polish, any like cute little user interactions that you want, you can probably do them with CSS. And most of the things that you can't do with CSS, you probably shouldn't be doing them anyways. So don't do them. And so I think this is a thing that's important. We had a CSS day yesterday. But like, you walk into the room for CSS day, and it's not as full as browser day. And just like people for years have taken front end less seriously, I think we are also guilty of taking CSS less seriously than we should be. It literally controls what the internet looks like. Without CSS, we're stuck with Times New Roman. Like, come on, care about CSS a little. But like, we really need to go back to progressive enhancement. This was a huge move a few years ago when we were talking about making the experience better with JavaScript instead of dictating the experience with JavaScript. And this is a thing that I think is really easy to do with static sites because when you're building that static site, you're thinking about what you're building and not how you're building it. And so the JavaScript is an additive factor instead of, a requirement for existence. And so there are a lot of benefits when you're building static sites, and some of these are not going to come as surprises to you people because I'm sure that these are benefits that you've thought of, but static sites are cheap. They are so cheap because they don't have servers. It's really expensive to run an application. It's not expensive to have a static site. Deploys are ludicrously easy as well. You just upload stuff to the internet, like files. You don't have to use Jenkins. You know how much I hate Jenkins? It's the downside of working on backend. You're in Jenkins all the time. Oh, it's the worst. Who remembers FTP? Yeah, see? It's easy. You also don't have to worry about scaling because it's a static page. You don't have to worry about workers, load balancing, minions. You don't need, I'm sorry if you're an SRE, but you don't need SREs if you have static sites. You don't get paged in the middle of the night because if your AWS S3 bucket is going down, that's not something you can fix. That's a bigger problem for somebody else. That's not your problem. You also actually have fewer problems with static sites because content becomes a shared responsibility. As an engineer, you're not the only person who knows how to update and change things. With static sites, you have simpler interfaces, and you can train other people to work with them as well, without actually requiring a multidisciplinary expert to build, ship, update, change. So if you have a bus factor of 1, you actually don't, because this is relatively straightforward to help people get up to speed on. And I usually get kind of hand-wavy when I talk about security, because I'm like, I use two-factor authentication, that's secure. But you do have fewer security concerns with a static site. You're not connecting to a database, you're not exposing an API, and because you don't have that application logic, you don't have to worry about people getting your data, so you're safe. You're totally safe, right? Right? Apparently not. Wow, you are just more coffee for you people. Static sites are actually really performant. It is really fast to load an HTML page with a style sheet and a couple images. Like, think about how long it takes to load a page that has a huge front-end application and then finish all of those promise callback hellscape scenarios. Like, that's a long time. That takes forever. And like, there are obviously downsides to building static sites. Users can't log into a static site. That's a thing. But in general, updates require some manual changes. You have to actually get in there, open a file, type some stuff, save it. Like, you know, like manual changes. However, this is also a downside when you're building new features and applications, so it's really not that big of a deal. If you do want to do the automation that helps make your life a little easier, it does require some expertise. Not a ton, but yeah, a little. It requires less expertise if you use some of the tools that are out there for you, and it'll save you a lot of duplicated work. But without those tools, you're just copying and pasting, and oh my god, that gets my thumb starts to hurt. Should probably change that keyboard shortcut or something. And there are a lot of generators. Like, you want to talk about the trash fire that is JS tooling, like, wow, there are a lot of generators. So, like, you know, that's a downside. And there's no real one-size-fits-all solution for building static sites. This is, however, also true of building literally anything else. So it's really not that big of a downside. Basically, what I'm telling you is I made up these downsides to make myself feel better, that I had a pro-con list, but they're also cons for, like, literally everything else that we do. And so how do you actually decide, like, if you should be building a static site or not? Like, well, it turns out it's the same way you make any technical decision, which is you answer seemingly endless questions from your product manager, your coworkers, your friends, your dog, whoever you talk to about these things. And so you have to think about, like, how often am I going to be updating content, and could I maybe automate that a little bit? Do I actually even have the ability to do that kind of automation? And if you are the kind of site where you do need users to log in and log out and maintain that state, this might not be an option for you. It might be, but it might not be. Do you need third-party data runtime? Is it required for your user's experience? Or is there some way that you can use that at build time and pre-compile everything and don't do dynamic rendering, do static rendering? Is your site supposed to be more informational, or is it supposed to be more interactive? And I'm not talking about interactive in the sense that, like, I click on a button and it makes rainbow sparkles, which is a UI you should absolutely build. I'm not a designer. I wish I was. They always have such cute outfits. But if your site's informational, like, that's probably an easy sell. If you're processing payments or storing any secure information, maybe not the right choice. Maybe it is, maybe it's not, probably not. And so static sites, like, in general, are super, super, super great at displaying information, but they are fucking awful at receiving user input and manipulating information. Like, it's just not what they're for. Like, there's definitely, like, a solid list of use cases for these things, and I use them for this all the time. But, you know, simple things like portfolios. We probably all have had a portfolio at some point in our professional careers, because how else do we convince people to hire us? It is certainly not our charm. Blogs, pretty straightforward, because then you don't have to have comments. So you don't actually have to interact with anybody that reads anything, which is like +1. Resumes, we've probably all made one of those at one point in our lives, and oh my god, if I have to make another PDF of a resume, worst. Prototypes. And this is actually really cool because a lot of your designers probably know HTML and CSS and can build a prototype that you can actually make use of. Events and conferences really benefit from this because it's informational, and oftentimes they use third-party things for ticket sales and feedback, and, you know, there's the Twitters and stuff. Brick and mortar businesses still exist, and they love static sites because they're cheap, cheap, cheap. You can also use them for informational marketing sites. I don't know about you, but I love informational marketing sites. They are so hilarious. Those stock photos. As I show you more stock photos. But if there's any way that you can use an API to generate your content ahead of time, that's going to save you a lot. It's going to save you a lot of effort. And if you know me on the internet, you know probably that I knit a lot. And you might know that before I was an engineer, I designed knitting patterns. And so, of course, when I became an engineer, I was like, oh my god, I'm going to do my website. That sucks. Don't do that. But, like, I already had all of this information stored in Ravelry, which if you're a knitter, you know what this is. And if you're not, let me just tell you, it is like where you are on the internet if you're a knitter. You buy and sell patterns, you like post your projects. It's like Instagram and Facebook and Amazon, and like it's overwhelming and terrifying, and it's got the worst UI. I'm sorry, my friends that work there. But the point is like I already had all this pattern information on here, and there's a lot of fields on this page. And when you make an update to a pattern, you have to update it on there, you have to update it on the PDF for the pattern, you have to update it on your website, and if you, God forbid, printed that pattern and shipped it to anyone, you have to email them or call them. And so this was tedious and a lot of work, but Ravelry had an API, so I was actually able to leverage the API to get all of that information and build the website for me. It took a little while to get it going, but it was a few shell scripts. It used to be Jekyll, now it's Middleman. And then the S3 Ruby gem, and now if I make a change to something in Ravelry and then run my script, it takes me a minute. And like that's including updating Ravelry. It takes me a minute to update Ravelry, rebuild the whole site, and then deploy the site. And by deploy, I mean upload. Like you're literally uploading a web page. And so this saved me as like a small independent business owner. Yay! This saved me a ton of work. And like actually having a server that would go in and make these API requests like on every single page load like, oh God, that's so much maintenance. But also like I didn't actually need it. I only make these updates about once a month or so. I don't need to request this information every time the page loads. It's already there, so I just generate everything ahead of time and boom, I'm done. It's awesome. And so like, how do you actually go about building these things? It turns out building a static site is pretty much the same as building an application. You write code. Really? You're all so sleepy. But you do it with planning, design, and forethought, just like you would with any other application. You actually like think about what you're building. You think about it a little bit differently, but you think about what you're building. This is the very important takeaway. Think about what you build. But you also use tools. And I realized I spent like the first half of this talk ranting about how our tools space might be a little confusing, overwhelming, and terrible. But, you know, we may as well use them if they're there. And so there are a lot of them. There are a lot of them. There are 437 of them when I made these slides. 437 static site generators, just when I made these slides, which was like a week ago. That's like super, super, super overwhelming. That's like a lot. That's not quite as many CSS libraries as we have to choose from when we're trying to get some scaffolding going, but like that's a lot. So how do you actually choose? And like my go-to has always been to filter by language preference. There are static site generators in Java. Like, talk about overkill. Why would you do that? And it's not like there's one, there's like 10. But there are like 111 Python static site generators. Go Python, cool for you. I mostly write Ruby and JavaScript in my free time though, so I have like 150 to choose from, which is pretty great. Also a little overwhelming. But you can also kind of pick and choose the features that you want from the thing that you want to use to build your project. And so pretty much everything offers templating, which we love because we hate reusing, no, we like reusing. We hate rewriting. And so templating is great. You also get things like live reload because heaven forbid we push a refresh button. And you get Sass and less, or Sass or less, or both, or post CSS or whatever. Like you have all these different options that you can use that you're used to, that you're comfortable with, that make your process faster. They're blog aware, and they also have deploy hooks, so it saves you a lot of time and effort. But like the bottom line is here is like you pick one that works for you. And for me, I hate bad documentation. I hate it, I hate it, I hate it. So for me, number one prerequisite is documentation. Number two prerequisite is it does the things I want. And so there's no shortage, so you get to be as picky as you want, which is pretty great, because now you get to leverage the tools that we have spent so much time building to make an awesome development experience for you, but still actually focus on building something for your users. And so you can focus on your finished product instead of your tools after you weed through all 437. And so you've done it, you're cool, you made a static site, good job you, right? Yay. Thank you, front row people. The rest of you, however, but upgrading can be for you and it can be for your users. It's better if it's for both because then you actually have a good motivating reason to do it. But you really have to think about when is it time to upgrade. So you have to ask yourself, how have your users' needs changed? And if you have that static site, you've had it there for a little while, you know your users better. You know what they're working on, you know what they're working on, you know what they're clicking on. And you also have to ask yourself, what technology do you actually need to support the changes you need to make? And again, the more familiar you are with your architecture, the better. You also have to think about how are you going to build it? Like what actual architecture decisions are you going to make? But because you're so familiar with what you've already built, you already have that hindsight that a lot of us don't have when we're building applications for the first time that cause us to make those terrible catastrophic mistakes. And so when you're going to do this, when you're going to upgrade from a static site to an actual app, I have like one very important thing that I ask that you keep in mind. Don't fuck with my bookmarks. make the URL stay the same. Just use a redirect or something. I don't care. Bookmarks are important. It's a bad user experience just to delete a page. Don't do that. See? You can clap for that. It's fine. You can also woo. Woo is okay. But like at the end of the day, actually upgrading is not that hard. You just copy and paste from one framework to another, or write a shell script or they'll do it for you. But templates in a static site are the same as templates in an application. And so if you're using something that has templating, it's actually not going to take you that much time to upgrade and add that big backend infrastructure later. And so really, like, don't make more work for yourself by trying to build the application first. Build the content first and the application later. And like, keep it simple. And remember that like people actually care about what the thing looks like and how it feels. Because websites feel. Like, you have feelings when you use websites. Oftentimes, for me, it is frustration. But build for people, not for yourself, please. And thanks. I was polite. That was polite. Mean but polite.